Hello everyone, I'm Miss Davis, and today I'm going to introduce you to plants. Plants are a very diverse group in the domain Eukarya. They have many adaptations to help them survive on land. They go from simple mosses to complex angiosperms, which are your flowering plants. Some unique adaptations are found in plants. All plants can perform photosynthesis. This means that they can take sunlight and carbon dioxide, and they're able to create their own food. This is not unique to plants though. Algae can do this as well. But sometimes plants live in areas like bogs and marshes where the soil does not allow them to get all of the nutrients they need. They don't just need food as in sugar, they also need nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And so sometimes these plants can become carnivorous. Like you see here, these are examples of carnivorous plants. Carnivorous plants are going to consume small animals, and in this case it's mostly insects, but they're going to consume these small animals for the nitrogen that these animals contain, not necessarily for food. It's for the nitrogen. And so here's some examples. This one's an example of a Venus flytrap. Here we have a sundew, and then last over here is a pitcher plant. All of them have unique adaptations that allow them to consume organisms, and so this is just a unique characteristic that some plants have. Let's talk about where plants evolved from. Plants are believed to evolve from a common ancestor of the green algae. Now with green algae, more specifically freshwater green algae called charophytes. Land plants today share some characteristics with this algae. For one, they have a cell wall made out of cellulose. This cell wall is made out of a sugar that's similar to the cell wall of this green algae. They also contain chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is what they use to do photosynthesis, and this is what they use as chlorophyll A and B in plants and algae. They also store their sugar as starch. Algae and plants both do this, and so this is why it's believed that this green algae is a common ancestor. However, when plants moved on to land, we saw that they are part of the clade that are called embryophytes. Embryophytes have the ability to protect their embryo from drying out. This is important since they're moving on to land. As you move up this clade, okay, as we get more advanced with evolution, you'll see that there's vascular tissue that's evolved, seeds, and then also we'll see here that we have flowers and fruit. These are the major steps we're going to focus on when we look at these different groups of plants. Now let's look at what characteristics all plants do have in common. All plants are called eukaryotic organisms, meaning their cells contain a nucleus and various organelles. This means that their cells are going to be complex. Okay, so these have complex cells. Also, these are considered autotrophs. Autotrophs means that they're self-feeders. They can self-feed through the process of photosynthesis. Photo meaning light, synthesis means they're going to make their food or sugar using sunlight. Also, they have the cell wall made out of cellulose, which we just discussed. Plants are considered terrestrial because they live on land. Okay, some plants have moved back into water, but most of them live on land. They also have a unique life cycle called Alteration of Generation, which in a moment we'll talk about more in detail. And again, these are embryophytes because they protect their embryo. And here in this picture you can see an embryo and it's being protected. It does not have to be protected inside of a seed, it just needs to be protected. Now if we focus in on Alteration of Generations, this is a life cycle which means that they have two multicellular individuals. So here we have a sporophyte multicellular individual and we have the gameophyte. So they're going to alternate between the two of these, one producing the other over and over again. So let's look at the cycle, and let's start with the sporophyte here. The sporophyte is a diploid organism, meaning that it has two copies of the chromosomes. Now, in this process, the sporophyte's going to go through and create spores, but it has to do so through the process of meiosis. Meiosis is going to half the number of chromosomes. Now this is how it works. It takes two in, that's what it starts with, and it divides the cell. When the cell divides, then we're going to get rid of the twos and N is left. Okay, so these have N, so they're considered haploid. They have one copy. This spore is going to go through the process of mitosis. Mitosis just means we're going to go from one cell to two 2 to 4 to create a multicellular organism. And in this case, it's the gameophyte. The gameophyte is still haploid, meaning that it has only one copy of the chromosomes, N. Okay, this haploid gameophyte is going to go through mitosis and it's going to create gametes. Now gametes, guys, are going to be egg and sperm. So this first one will have it be the egg, and this one I'm going to draw a tail on so that you can see it's the sperm, just so we can see the difference. When the egg and sperm fuse together in the process of fertilization, we create a zygote. This zygote again has two copies because N plus N equals 2N. So the zygote has two copies of chromosomes. It's going to go through mitosis, increasing in number to create the sporophyte again. And the process is going to continually go over and over. Now, sometimes this process is even. Okay, 50% in one and 50% in the other. But you're going to see that a lot of plants, one of these generations, whether it's sporophyte or gameophyte, is going to be more dominant, meaning you're going to see it more often. It's going to take up more of the life cycle or time of the plant. Okay, so this is the unique life cycle, and this is only seen in plants. It's not seen in any other organism, won't be seen in fungus, protists, or even animals. It's only in plants. So when we look at this, guys, and we look at it in the plants we're going to focus in, you'll see here in mosses, the gameophyte is going to be the dominant generation. This is what you see when you see a moss. You only see the sporophyte generation when it's ready to release the spores. Also here in ferns, when you're looking at a fern, you're going to see the sporophyte generation. That's what the plant looks like, as well as in the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. As we move towards the more advanced plants, we see here that this gameophyte generation becomes reduced and very small in the process. And we see here in angiosperms, it's very small and it's going to normally be protected within the flowers. Now, the dominance of this sporophyte generation, this 2N generation, is important as we move on to land. So these plants need this as they moved on to land. Here we move on to land, and the plants are also going to have that embryo protection. We talked about that being the first step. Well, the organisms that have this are the bryophytes. These are the mosses, hornworts, and liverworts. In order to move on to land, they needed to be able to protect their embryo, and they're able to do that. But mosses are considered what we would call non-vascular. Now, non-vascular means they do not have vascular tissue that acts as a kind of plumbing system that takes water, okay, H2O, from their roots to their shoots. Now their shoots, guys, are the stems and leaves. So because of this, you're going to see mosses growing close to the ground. You're not going to see them growing up against gravity, okay? They're going to grow close to the ground. The gameophyte is the dominant generation that's found in mosses. This means when you're looking at this moss, this bottom part down here, which is the major part of the plant, it's haploid, has one copy of the chromosomes. Now remember that this is the one that's going to create the gametes. So when we look at this, the gameophyte is going to produce eggs in what we call the archegonia. Okay, that term is important. Archegonia is going to produce the eggs. The antheridia is going to produce the sperm. Now the sperm in this case is flagellated. It has a tail, which means it has to swim from the antheridia to the archegonia. So fertilization in bryophytes is going to be water dependent. They have to have water so that the sperm can swim. Once the fertilization of the egg and the sperm takes place, it creates the sporophyte generation. Now the sporophyte, remember, is going to release the spores. Now this creates a capsule area that's called the sporangia. The spores would be inside of here, okay, in this little structure. When this structure or capsule opens up, the spores are going to be carried by the wind to grow into a brand new moss plant. Okay, so these are the most primitive plants that we know, or that we're going to study, which are the bryophytes. When we move on to the next group, which is the ferns, we see that they live on land. They also have embryo protection, but now they have vascular tissue. They have that tissue which allows the plant to grow larger and to move the water up the plant from the roots to the shoots. We also see more advanced structures in those roots, stems, and leaves. Okay, so it's a more advanced structure of these. When we talk about ferns, this is a group we're going to see, they have a large structure that is a large leaf called a frond. These fronds have little leaflets attached. You see them coming off of here. These are called the leaflets. The dominant generation you see in this picture in all ferns is going to be the sporophyte generation. This sporophyte generation is going to be dominant, and it's going to have the sporangia on the underside of the leaves. And on the underside of these leaves, there's going to be small dots that look kind of like a powder. Well, that powder is the spores, and these are called sori. Now, once the spores are released, the gameophyte generation is going to grow underneath kind of the bigger part of the plant, and it has a heart shape to it. On part of this structure is going to still be the archegonia. The archegonia is going to still produce the eggs, and then another part's going to be the antheridia, and it's going to produce the sperm. Now, the sperm in this case is still flagellated, which means it's still going to have water in order for fertilization to take place. So even though these plants can grow larger and they can grow up against gravity, they still have to be tied more to water even to reproduce. So this is going to be your ferns. Now, the next group, we see all of the characteristics before, but the next significant adaptation for land plants is the development of the seed. Now, the seed is going to contain inside of it, it's going to have the new little plant. I'm just going to draw a little plant. And then it's also going to have in this area a new food source. This food source is going to feed the baby plant. The outer edge of the seed is going to be called the seed coat. So this is what we start to see with the seed. The first group that has these are the gymnosperms. Now, the gymnosperm means naked seed. Now, this doesn't mean the seed is missing this coat here that I showed you. It means that the seeds of the gymnosperm are exposed on cones. Okay, so these are the trees that have cones. Conifers are the most recognizable group, and pine trees is what we would normally think of. The dominant generation is the sporophyte for the gymnosperms, which produces pollen grains or pollen cones on these male cones, and you see them here. They're the smaller cones in this picture. Okay, and they also have seed cones, which are the female cones. These are going to create what we call megaspores. Okay, so the female is going to be megaspores. The male is going to create microspores, and that's only because sperm is smaller than egg. The microspores are going to develop into the male gameophyte, and they're going to produce the pollen or the sperm. Now, the pollen and sperm in this case has no flagella. Okay, it has no tail. The megaspores are going to form or develop into the female gameophyte, and they're going to produce eggs. The pollen grains here are lightweight, and they're going to be carried by the wind. So the wind's going to blow these pollen grains onto the female cone. Once they're on the female cone, this is called pollination. Pollination is the movement of the sperm to the female gameophyte, in this case, the seed cone. Once the pollen is there, it can then find the egg and fertilize it. It does not need water to do this. Wind is actually going to be the best help with this group. So water is no longer needed with the gymnosperms. Now, this last group you're going to notice here, we have the land and embryo protection, the vascular tissue, the seeds, and now we have flowers and fruit. These are found in the angiosperms. Now, angiosperm means covered seeds. Angiosperms are flowering plants, and they make up 70% of all the plants on Earth. So this is going to also be the largest group. The new adaptations present here are flowers and fruit. Most angiosperms belong to one of two groups. Okay, now these two groups, they're just divided by the beginning of their name, and there's some characteristics we're going to discuss, but in later lectures. The first group are going to be known as monocots. Monocots. Now, guys, monocots is short for monocotyledon. We also see the second group are going to be the eudicots. Okay, eudicots is just short for eudicotyledons. And again, we'll talk about these differences a little bit later in future lectures. Now, the dominant generation is again the sporophyte generation, and the reproductive structures on the angiosperms are the flowers themselves. So the flower is going to actually contain the gameophyte, and you'll notice how it's a lot smaller compared to the rest of the plant. Okay, now all flowers have a couple of things. The first thing they're going to have is they're going to have sepals. The sepals are what protect the bud before the flower actually blooms. And so when a flower blooms like you see here in the picture, these sepals are going to eventually fall off. Okay, and they're going to fall away from the flower. We also see that they have petals. You can see the petals here are all in pink. Okay. These petals are going to be used to attract pollinators. So this is why they use flowers. They use animals or insects to pollinate their flowers, to move their pollen from point A to point B. So they're not using just wind or water now, they're also using animals. Also, we see here that this is going to have the male parts called the stamen. This is a stamen here. This part right here that you see is kind of longer and discolored here, that's going to be what we call the anther. The anther is where the pollen is being created. The anther is held to the flower by the filament. Okay, that's the little stalk that holds it to the flower. The female portion or structure of the plant is called the carpel, and you can see that one right here in the center. Okay, it's the tallest structure. At the top here, you're going to see this is called the stigma. Now, the stigma is sticky. It's able to collect the pollen that's produced, okay, or released. So pollination is going to rely on the stigma to catch it. This is the style, okay, this long tube. The style is going to attach the stigma to the ovary. The ovary is down here in the bottom part of the plant. This ovary is going to contain ovules. These ovules are then going to make eggs. Okay, so this is where the eggs are technically found. Once pollen travels down this tube, it goes through a process that we call double fertilization. Now, this is unique to this group, and we'll talk about this double fertilization in more detail later. But with this double fertilization that takes place, once these eggs are fertilized, then seeds are produced. So the ovules are going to turn into seeds, which means that the ovary down here is going to turn into the fruit, because a fruit has seeds on the inside of it. Well, an advantage of having fruit is it causes animals to want to eat it. When the animals eat the fruit, they digest the fruit but not the seeds, and the seeds get dispersed. So this helps in dispersion. Also, that fruit is going to offer protection to those seeds as well. So angiosperms, guys, is the group we're going to spend the most time on because they're the largest group. Before we close out this particular lecture, let's talk about how plants are helpful to us as humans. In your book, this is found on page 368 and 369. Please read these pages carefully because there's lots of ways that we utilize plants. For one, we can use them as food, like you see here with your grains and your grasses. This would be like wheat, corn, and rice. Also, they can be used for sugar production. Sugar beets and sugar cane help us make sugar. They can be used as spices, like you see here in this picture. There's lots of different spices that come from plants, okay, and they make our food taste better, and so that's important. Also, drinks like coffee, tea, and cola come from plants. Rubber, even. You can see here, this is the rubber tree. What they do is they poke a hole in it and they collect the sap, okay, and that's going to be used to make rubber or latex. Also, we can use the cotton to create fabric. Now, this is non-synthetic. This is more of a natural fabric, which we see here with the cotton. We can use it for lumber as well to build things. They can be used for pharmaceutical drugs as they have different components that help with different diseases. And last, like you see here, they are for aesthetic value. We enjoy looking at them. This is one reason why flower sales go up during Mother's Day and Valentine's Day. They're aesthetically pleasing. We like to plant them in our gardens. We like to have plants in our house. And so these are just some examples of how plants can be helpful. Hopefully this helps you get a better understanding of the basics of plants. And in further lectures, we'll talk about their structures and how those structures function in nature.